Well, good day. I'm Rudy Maxa. Welcome. I'm 2 minutes late. I'm sorry here. I always have technical problems. Not technical problems, my problems. And my guest has not yet shown up yet, but I'll tell you who it should be. If she doesn't, we'll do open phones and I'll take questions from you guys. Her name is Roya Hakakian, and she is the editor of this book. Excuse me, the author of this book, A Beginner's Guide to America, subtitled For the Immigrant and the Curious. This is the most powerful book I've read in a long time. These are just some of the notations I made while reading the book. It's the most I've ever made. I've torn off some of them, so there are about 10 missing. But almost every 10 pages, there was something I had to mark that I wanted to share with you. I hope that Roya, who I tried to call and did not get an answer either earlier this morning or today, I hope she remembers it's now. I hope she'll be dialing in at any moment. Meanwhile, I got some complaints because I didn't do any wine the last 2 weeks. You know, I can't tell. Sometimes people say, "Oh, why are you doing the wine? It's a travel show." Some people say, "Why aren't you doing wine?" I'm pleased to do wine today, and I'm doing it in memory of a friend of mine named Stephen Spurrier. You may know his name. He's a very well-known in the wine world writer and wine expert. He died a month ago, March 2nd to be exact, March 9th. I'm sorry. He was 79 years old. He died of cancer. He lived in England. He's an Englishman whose interest in wine was ignited when he was 13 years old, and he had his first sip of a 1908 Coburn's port. And from then on, he never looked back. He went to work for one of the oldest and most famous wine cellars in England, which is Christopher and Company. And then in 1970, he moved to Paris, and he convinced an elderly woman to sell him her small wine shop just off the Rue de Royale. As you may know, that's a very good address, not far from the river, not far from Notre Dame. And he made his reputation because he really loved French wines. But in 1976, he did something that later became a movie. You may have seen the movie called Bottle Shock. And what he did was he arranged a tasting with another American woman of French wines, and they put a couple California wines in to see how the French might react to that. Now, I can assure you, in 1976, the French really had no appreciation for American wines. In fact, they looked down on them. And so this was going to be an interesting blind test. They had, I believe, 17 judges, 17 French judges. Stephen was not a judge. The American woman who helped arrange this was not a judge. And it came to be known as the Judgment of Paris, which, of course, is a throwback to a story from the old days. Really, really old days, Roman and Greek times. It was also known as the Paris tasting. And they tasted reds and whites. And an American red and American white beat out 8 or 9 French wines. And I can't tell you what a shock that was to French people and to French winemakers, and even to winemakers all over the world and wine tasters all over the world. This was a blind tasting. Of course, the judges had no idea what was inside each bottle because they were wrapped, I presume, in paper bags. And the fact that an American red and an American white came in first place was cataclysmic to the wine industry. It is still talked about this today. The Bottle Shock, the movie, came out in 2008, I believe. I wrote this down somewhere. Where is it? Yeah, 2008 was the movie Bottle Shock. And it was a story, Alan Rickman played my friend Stephen Spurrier. It was a story of Stephen Spurrier's wine tasting, The Judgment of Paris. I looked and happened to find a bottle of Stag's Leap in my collection for tasting today. It's a very well-known California wine. It's not impossible to get. Now, this is the first vintage, by the way, was 1893. That's when somebody started growing grapes there. I don't think the current owners did. And in the tasting, it was a 1973 bottle that the judges tasted in 1976. I have a 2016 bottle, so that's 25 years old. It should have been aged nicely. I stood it up about a half an hour ago. I poured myself a glass and put the cork back in because I want to take it to dinner tonight. Because I can't drink a whole bottle during the show. Though if my guest doesn't show up, I may have to. Anyway, here it is. Big California red, as they always are. That big purple. Big nose. Let's see if Stag's Leap has still got it. By the way, the other American winners in red were Ridge Vineyards Montebello, which is still being made, and Mayacamas Vineyards still being made. In the white, Stag's Leap won the white as well. No, excuse me, didn't win the white as well. The white was Chateau Montelena, which sounds French, but it's not. It's an American winery, Chateau Montelena, also a great red wine. Chalone Vineyard and Spring Mountain and Freemark Abbey and David Bruce wineries. I mean, that's 1, 2, 3. That's 4 Americans out of 10 wines that actually placed in the top 10. But Chateau Montelena was first in white. Stag's Leap Cellar was first in red. So let's give it a taste and we'll move on. It's pretty nice. If you're a regular viewer of these webcasts, you know I'm sort of a Burgundy guy. And I have a lot of California reds, but I find they're not quite as delicate as Burgundy, and I'm a little snobby about it. But there you go. Anyway, this is really, really good. Now, it's 25 years old. It's my last bottle of Stag's Leap. It's that old. So I'm delighted you're here to share it with me. Anyway, it's awful good. Let me just see what the retail price is. Bear with me for a minute. Stag's Leap. What is this? 2016 cab. Let's see. Okay, so you can buy a bottle of this now, the 26. Oh, well, between $55 and $185. What pops up real quick here at wine.com. So there you go. So it's between $60 and $160 a bottle. But I think you can buy them retail now for $50, $60, $70 a bottle. So it's not outrageous. Anyway, it was a big deal to the French wine industry. Big shock. California wines suddenly had so much more respect. Vintners could raise their prices, particularly Montelena and Stag's Leap. My guest has still not shown up. I don't know what to tell you about her. Did I hear a voice, or is that my echo? I think that's
You can see me. Hi, Rudy.
Hi, is this you? Is this you, Roya?
Yes.
Now, can you click, if you go up to the upper left-hand corner, there's a blue circle next to the microphone on the left. It looks like a locomotive coming at you. Ooh. That is supposed to be a camera. There you are.
Yay.
Oh, thank goodness, because I was going to have to talk for another 57 minutes.
No. I was worried because I kept waving.
Listen, I tuned in 2 minutes late. I'm delighted to have you. I've already held up your book. I did a wine tasting.
Yes, I saw.
And this is a copy of Roya Hakakian's book. I presume I'm pronouncing your name correctly, yes? Mm-hmm. Okay. And I don't know if you saw me, or you probably didn't see me, Roya. I have never, in reading an author's book, in preparation to having them on this webcast, put so many stickums in here. Oh. And I took about 10 out because I have written down on paper some of your great writing and some of your great quotes. Oh. This is a look. Well, it's called The Beginner's Guide to America for the Immigrant and the Curious. And that's exactly what it is. It's Roya's observations. She is an immigrant herself. So why don't we start with that, Roya? Tell us a little bit about you and your past and where you came from.
Hi, it's a pleasure. I loved seeing your marked up book. It's deeply touching. I was born and raised in Iran. And when the revolution swept through Iran in 1979, everything became unstable and the country was no longer the country we knew. So we waited for a while, and then in 1984, my family, my mother and I, left together, and it took us a year. We were in Europe for about a year while we applied for asylum.
Roya, your voice just dipped for a minute when you said the year that you left Iran. What year was that?
We left. My mother and I left in 1984.
84.
We went to Europe first because we had to apply for asylum to the United States, and that took about a year for our applications to be processed. And I arrived here in 1985, and then naturalized about 10 or so years later.
And you did arrive speaking in English, correct?
None.
No, oh, really?
None.
I didn't pick that up from the book. I mean, you talked about many immigrants arriving not speaking English, but I presumed you did.
No, none. Actually, some of the scenes about the English as a second language classes were my recollections, And it's interesting that we're talking about English because part of the reason why I felt like, oh my God, I should write this book was that in 2016, when Donald Trump was saying, let us not accept immigrants who don't speak English, I thought, I wouldn't have got in just because, they weren't going to give me a chance to learn. And it was such a personal blow when I heard that because I came to love English. it has become the language in which I think and I dream. And so I feel like, what if he hadn't, what if he had been president and I hadn't gotten the chance to have this experience?
I'm sure you're not the only immigrant who winced when he said that. When I was a Washington, D.C. based journalist decades ago, after I was at the Washington Post for 11 years out of college, I joined the City magazine Washingtonian as a senior writer. And we did a long piece on what was what was then the Soviet Union embassy. It wasn't Russia, it was still the Soviet Union. And I wanted to find out, and not many Russians could leave their compound. They didn't trust them to go out there in the open economy, and they might get snatched up by somebody. But some senior diplomats were allowed to leave and go shopping and so on. And I did a very huge long piece, like 10, 20, 12,000 words on what it's like to be a Soviet citizen stationed in Washington, D.C. And I've never forgotten the one thing that stuck most in my mind. I asked a question. I don't remember the exact wording, but what I meant to say, what I was saying really to this diplomat was, it must be amazing when you go in one of our great big supermarkets and you see all this food, because at the time the Soviet Union was not as advanced as Russia is now economically. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, actually not. And I said, well, what do you mean? I mean, look, it's a cornucopia here. He said, well, in Russia, we have 2 kinds of cereal. And I go to your grocery store and there's 50 different, I don't know which one to pick. In Russia, when I need a plumber, I have 1 phone number to call. I pick up what Americans call your yellow pages, and there are 18,000 plumbers in Washington, D.C. I don't know, who do I call? Which are the 18,000? Exactly. And in your book, you wrote this. Mm-hmm. When you realize the difference between what you used to pay for cereal and what you have to pay now, you gasp, toss the box back on the shelf, and curse the contents, which must have been individually priced. They're your best way to enjoy the bounty you see without drowning in the bygone. You are here at the American feast. Oh, beautiful. Oh, smogless skies. Oh, infinite virtual bazaar. Oh, overflowing bins of seasonless fruits. Oh, overstocked grocery aisles. Oh, uncensored books in the endless electronic stores. Oh, newspapers and magazines of unmonitored and uninspected content. Think of this new life as a second one you were never supposed to leave. That shocked me. It shocked me decades ago. It still shocks me because, most Americans think, well, we're doing so great, and anybody should be so grateful, even if they don't speak English, to walk into one of our big stores and look at all the tomatoes and different kinds of strawberries and apples we have. Mm-hmm. But it's different to an immigrant, and seeing things through your eyes in this book is what makes this book so powerful. I know you've been here a long time now. Are you still surprised by anything?
I think it's really almost a spiritual experience for me, because I feel like I arrived and then I preserved the vision and the perspective of the person who I was when I first arrived. Sure. And I can summon her and have her look at things. And it's really strange because I was only 19. And, as 19-year-olds, we're really, we're not very serious about everything. We think that we're going to be young for the rest of our lives. We don't think anything can expire. So I could have said to myself, oh, you don't have to be so serious about remembering these things. I was that way about so many other things. I wasn't that way about my encounter with America. I knew the moment I left the airport that something monumental had happened to me and to my life. And my job, it was to remember, to commit everything to memory. And even now, there are times that I can still summon the girl and have her see so many of these things. And I think, I'm glad you picked this particular passage, because it's a hell of a lot to learn to live in a democracy, because you have suddenly so many decisions to make. There are so many brands of cereal, and there are so many decisions that had already been made for me when I lived in Iran, sure, which now I had to take the trouble of making for myself. And these are the ways in which I think we as Americans fail to see how our freedoms, our democracy, translate into the currency of daily life. I think we can't see exactly.
We can't. We can't. And that's your book. Your book turns the binoculars around for us who are native, those of us who are Native Americans. I mean, so much so that I cried in many of your passages, frankly. What struck you about when you were coming through the airport from Europe to come to America for the first time? What about the name tags on all the people working behind customs and immigration desks? What surprised you about that?
The variety, there was a Cho, and then there was an Ahmadi, and then there was a McWilliams, and then there was a Brown. And I'm thinking, my God, all of these people, I had never met, I'd never seen such a human salad at any place that was not a tourist site. I mean, we had stopped in Geneva on our way to America, and, there were some, tourist destinations we had gone to, and I had seen, Japanese tourists and other tourists, but in a place that was not meant to be, a site that
work
simply passing through. I had never seen such a medley of human beings, and I thought that was staggering. And especially, even forget Europe, in Iran especially, I had never seen people a lot darker than myself. I'd never seen a Black person, and all of that was really incredibly an experience, a feast for my eyes, let alone anything else.
You talk about how Americans fill their time compared to how people under dictatorships or tyrants. You lived under I guess we all know what you lived under in Iran. I don't have to phrase it and get in fights with anybody, but certainly there's I
call it a theocracy.
A theocracy, right? There's a cleric that runs everything.
Yes.
And you talk about how immigrants may not understand what Americans do with all their time. Right. You say attending college, apprenticing, taking on volunteer positions, training at technical schools, studying for various license exams. They take up hobbies that'll make them appealing to future employers. And here's the crucial part that got to me, Roya. You write, this is your writing, all the feats you performed to escape and outfox every danger, which seemed like major triumphs at the time, warrant no mention now. There's no place on a resume for swimming across the Rio Grande several times. You cannot brag about being the only person who survived the massacre in your village. You get no credit for successfully bribing corrupt customs officials or for perfectly forging exit documents. That's powerful stuff. So powerful, I need to get a tissue, so you talk.
This is something I thought about when the first time someone told me that I had to write a resume. And I said, what in the world is a resume? And they said to me, you have to put together a page filled with what it is you can and cannot do, your skills, your talents, your education. And I was thinking, I have a lot of skills, but I just can't put it on a piece of paper. And it was shocking to me because I knew I had a great deal, but it wasn't rugby and it wasn't tennis. And it didn't fall under any of the categories that were presentable on a resume. And that was quite earth-shattering to me. That how do I forget language? How do I translate my life experience and what I've lived through?
You spent a good amount of your time trying to avoid getting in trouble with the religious police or anything associated with the theocracy at all. I mean, you were just trying to survive. You weren't deciding whether you'd rather be a bird watcher, we'll talk about that later, or be a professional bowler or fall in love and sit around the park all day and with your boyfriend, or girlfriend. There's nothing, that was not anything that troubled you.
Right. Exactly.
You had to worry about.
Not at
You said during the first few weeks, again, I'm quoting you, and I don't normally read from people's books, but your writing is so good and it says it so much better than I can summarize it. During the first few weeks, you will feel mostly disoriented. Your body may recover from the continental change, but your mind will remain jet lagged. A fog envelops everything you see and touch as you stagger from place to place. Despair will set in when you realize that you are at the mercy of others to get you through the fog and the most mundane routines. doubt and regret peck at your mind like crows at a roadkill. Your English is pretty good.
I finally learned, it's a blessing. Trump wasn't president. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gotten to do this.
Tell us what you mean by assimilation is not a destination. It's most likened to a marriage.
Yeah, I think we get hung up on assimilation, and people say, "Oh, don't assimilate. You should stay who you are." And that's all right. I can't stay exactly who I am, but what would be the fun of that? I was who I was before coming here. I want to experience a new dimension to myself. So I think, it is beautiful to also, in addition, become American, to have this experience of becoming part of something greater than myself or my own community. So, but I think the reason that so many people seem to be having trouble with the term is that it's seen as a fixed destination, that you're there and then that's all you are. Whereas I think it's a negotiation. You do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and you can remain you can remain whoever you were and become an American citizen and let all these things kind of coexist. And I think that is beautiful, because it's about expanding the possibilities of what we can experience.
I want to ask about your mother in a moment, but if you just tuned in, as they say on the radio, my guest is the author, Roya Hakakian, of this new book called A Beginner's Guide to America. She moved here from via Europe through Persia in 1984 or Iran, and has written a stunning book that should be issued to everyone who, for some reason, thinks immigrants should land here, immediately assimilate, speak English, love the country like nobody else, and not complain about anything. And by the way, to Stuart Williams, my friend who just joined, yes, and saw me with the wine, yes, I did mention Stephen Spurrier died last month, and we're tasting a Stag's Leap that I have, Stuart, not from you, of 2016, and it's very good. Now, let's go back to my guest, to Roya. You say you came here with your mother, and you have told us how you felt upon arriving here. How did your mother feel upon arriving in America?
Devastated. It's one of those things that the native born can't seem to understand, because they want you to be as immigrants. The native born want us to be immediately grateful and immediately ecstatic, but these things don't happen immediately, because however bad were the circumstances from which we came, no one wants to be driven out, whether for economic reasons or political reasons. No one wants to be driven out of the place where they were born and raised. No one wants to be driven out of the place where their ancestors are buried, where they have a sense of mastery over their environment. And so, people always say, "Oh, you must be delighted to be here." Well, eventually I was, but I wasn't in the very beginning. And so I think my mother just brought this devastation, this melancholy that never really shook. And I think my advantage was that, of course, I was 19, and
we were talking about, you were saying that it was easier for you to come at 19. I always said because you're not fully formed yet as an adult. Did other family members join you and your mother eventually?
I had 3 brothers who were here already.
Okay.
That's another book, which is a memoir. It was my first book, and they, they had come many years earlier. My mother and I came together, and my father joined us about 5 or 6 years later. And he, like my mother, kind of, remained melancholic for.
Where did you settle? Where did the family settle?
New York.
New York City?
Yes. So in fact, there's a little box in the book where there's a man who is elderly and is writing poetry, and then 9/11 strikes, and he goes and grabs an American flag and hangs it from the railings of his balcony. That's my dad.
And that was your dad.
Yeah. I mean, it was amazing. He suddenly he
became a full American.
Yeah, he became this patriot. I didn't know he was, and I don't think he knew he was. Which is my way of saying that if you just let immigrants be, they will eventually arrive at all the things that you want them to arrive at. And my father was a perfect example, because he would sit on the balcony in Queens, New York, and write poem after poem about how much he missed Iran and how much he wished he was in his childhood village. And then suddenly 9/11 struck, and in the very, very long distance, he could see the smoke rising from the towers. And then suddenly, and he had macular degeneration, so he couldn't see well. But then he put his shoes on and he got himself together. He went to the grocery store around the corner, came back with the biggest flag he could find. And then he, took away all the geranium pots from the balcony railings, and he hung this flag on the railings. And it was really moving because, but first of all, I really took him seriously when he was writing.
I'm here. I'm still here. Go ahead.
When he was writing all these all these poems about missing Iran. But then, clearly that was just a hobby. He didn't really, he knew exactly to whom he was loyal and who it was that he was grateful to. So
it's an affecting book. I should have had the tissues nearer me when I started. I mean, it's a very affecting story. One of the most fascinating chapters is called Welcome to Self-Estan.
Yes.
In which you explain that, and I quote you, at the core of the American spirit is the quest to seek that self, whether they're working out in a gym to define their abs. And you say Americans define the seeking of self and blare it to everyone, which is why American car bumpers are filled with stickers and people get so many tattoos. But you say that what the difference between an autocratic society and where you lived in Persia and where people are living in so many countries today, from North Korea to, oh my gosh, Myanmar, everywhere, that things that Americans take for granted, and let's talk about bird watching, that puzzles immigrants. Why can we do that? And why is it possible in a democratic society? And you say, because we have larger swaths of time. We're not ducking the religious police. We're not getting hauled in for questioning every time we look cross-eyed at a policeman or something. We have time on our hands.
Exactly. You can't imagine. The trouble is, when we think about democracy in this country, when we think about freedom, but primarily democracy, we think it's all about elections. And we think it's about, it's something that comes along every 4 years or every 2 years. And we go to the voting booth, and that's democracy. Well, that is the most reductive way of thinking about democracy. The real democracy is what it is that we are capable of doing on a daily basis, which is to go bird watching. Why? Because democracy and freedom creates. Excuse
me, sorry, forgot to turn off the alarm. The phone.
So much time and space in our lives, because we're not afraid or worried about so many other things that you have to be afraid and worried about if you weren't living in a democratic society. Like, shopping can be an ordeal in a country where, there's shortage of everything, or, simply going out can be an ordeal, as it was in Iran. If you're a woman and you have to constantly worry what it is that you're putting on your head and whether your head covering is right, and then it's enough to run into some pissed off guardsmen who find something about the way you look offensive, and then they stop you and start searching you, and that can be your daily life, your routine hours. And so it becomes a thing that consumes you all the time. So it leaves no room for hobbies. It leaves no room thinking about, how is it that I want to spend my Sunday? Or I wonder whether, the plumage of this bird or the other.
You even say romance takes longer in America because you have the luxury of time for it to take a long time.
Exactly.
What is it like in Persia in what is, I know romance is behind closed doors generally, but what is the seduction's the wrong word, the wooing, what is the amount of time for romance leading to marriage? Is it fairly limited? You're either in or you're out quickly?
Well, primarily because, at least in my days, and I know that's still true, you couldn't be out with a man, or in my case, a boy, who was not related to you. So
once you have your brother or your father with you or something?
Father, or, some relative.
Right.
And I remember when I was 17 years old, I was out walking with a boy, someone I really liked. And we had coordinated ahead of time what we would say if we had been stopped, if we would be stopped, if we were to be stopped. And, so he said, I said, we're cousins and we're going to my aunt's house. And so we came up with this story to tell whoever, if we were to get caught. And so we did get caught. And here's what happened. I gave this story as we had agreed, but my boyfriend got really emotional and started saying to the guard, well, sir, we're really in love and I want to marry her. And
I did it.
And so he took us to my parents' home to tell my parents what it was that I was doing. And then exactly, so that I could get a beating. And then, he was alone. And after we went to my parents' house, other things happened and he eventually let us go. But the point was that we couldn't be together on the street. So when there's all this, when they constantly pressure you to either be at home or be in hiding, then eventually, everything becomes misshapen, even the normal experience of.
And marriage is an escape.
And marriage is an escape if you can afford it. And then, but most people can't. And then you realize that you didn't really mean to get married. You just really wanted to date. But, the only way you could have dated was if you actually got married. So many marriages turn out, end up failing simply because they were never meant to be marriages. They were marriages only because there was no other option.
You do write about, you suggest to an immigrant taking their first walk through a park.
Yeah.
And, seeing some fat guy lying with his shirt off on the grass, listening to music, and, a man and a woman cuddling and maybe kissing a little, which is, nearly an X-rated movie in Persia in those days.
Yeah.
Being a couple making out or even kissing, lying on a lawn somewhere. And those all come as shocks to the system. Now, I presume not all people, you celebrate the freedom that is different than it was in Persia, but I'm sure some, maybe even your parents might have gone, I don't want to see that. This is terrible. This is sinful.
Right. Yes, of course, because they worry about the next generation and they, begin to think, American values, there's a lot about America we like, but we don't want our daughters to start behaving this way. And, all those things come into play. But it is shocking to those of us who come to this country from these supremely religious or supremely modest cultures, where individuals are not expected to put themselves on display, so I know for a fact that China is the same way. You don't make out on the streets, not because it's a religious system, but it's a system where you are not expected to, as an individual, to be on display,
Right.
And so again, I think these are the ways in which our democracy manifests itself, and we fail to see that all these little gifts, all these small ways in which we live the kind of life that we live, are precisely the gifts of that democracy, and it isn't just.
And we don't see it as a Native American. I mean, I spent a lot of my childhood growing up in Europe, and it was a little different, but not that different.
Yeah.
But we don't see that as Americans. I don't marvel at the ability to a man and a woman to sit hand in hand on a park bench. I don't marvel that there are 50 serials. One of the funniest things, one of the most amusing things to me in your book is, let's see how. The thrill that many immigrants find in their ability to buy something at a store and then return it as if by magic.
Yes.
Can you expound on that a little for us? What that means?
Well, we have suspension bridges in America, but to an immigrant from the place where I come from, that is not as astonishing as is the fact that you can buy a sweatshirt, wear it for a couple of weeks, and if you have kept the receipt, you can still return it to the store. That is most astonishing, more astonishing than the suspension bridges. And I tell you why, because this doesn't happen, in most places in the world. This doesn't happen. And the reason it happens here, and this is another one of those things that Americans take for granted or fail to see, that democracy is the reason why you have consumer rights, and therefore you're able to return something and not be married to it for the rest of your life. Right. And so I remember I have a friend who came to America about 20 years ago, and in the first week that she was with me, I told her, "Oh, let's go to the Gap. I bought something I need to return." And she to this day tells me that she thought we were going to be arrested.
Astonished.
Because there was no way on earth that something that I had purchased, could be returned. And she says it was one of the most astonishing things she remembered from her early days.
To you when they return it, they don't yell at you.
Yes.
They're so sorry the sweater didn't fit, or you didn't like the sweatshirt. Maybe you'd like something. What can we help you with?
Yes, exactly.
We talk a lot about service, and Americans are very good at that. But before we get to that, and equally in a different, more serious way than the ability to return items at stores, which you said some people would do 12 or 13 times until they were convinced this really worked, you said you give an example of a student at a medical school. Was that you?
That was my girlfriend who
had. Doctor asks her opinion on a case. Well, you put it this way. You said, let's say you're a student at a medical school and a doctor asks your opinion on a case and you're tongue-tied. Why? Well, because it's suddenly become clear why you had to leave your country of birth. Yes, you liked America's drive-thrus and its roller coasters, but the reason you left and that you can never return is all about this moment that has been given to you. You have been respected as an equal. Your opinion has been asked. You can never go back to a place where you'd be treated otherwise. Yes. And you said she was shocked that a doctor who was teaching a class would turn to a medical student and say, "What's your opinion on this case?"
Yes.
Never happened.
And this truly happened, because this friend of mine had come as an exchange student to America to do 3 months here and then go back. And there was a day that she had attended the ground rounds at the medical school where she was on exchange here in the U.S. And the head doctor was discussing a really difficult case and had turned to her and said, "So what do you think?" And she came home to me and said, "Look, there isn't anything they're teaching me as far as the science of medicine is concerned none of them knew. In fact, on many levels, I'm ahead of them when it comes to the science. But what I can't afford to lose any longer is the fact that I'm among a group of people who seek my opinion. And I can no longer imagine myself going back and living and working with people who never turn to me to wonder what it is that I do, both as a younger person or as a woman, whatever. And it that that was one of the sort of mental moves I took at that moment in my life. I thought this articulated why we were here and we couldn't go back.
This book is filled with anecdotes like that. It is a fascinating read. It's a new book, by the way, just came out. And Roya has put together, as I said, sort of a step-by-step guide to an immigrant, but it's really, as far as I'm concerned, it was written for me and for all naturally born Americans. You also talk about this, you say Americans are always trying to help someone, and they're not necessarily only doing it for one's kin. And you talk about, many immigrants arrive under the auspices maybe of a religious group or something, and they'll already have an apartment, and they'll stock some basic food in the refrigerator, and some clothes are there, and the beds are made, and so on. And immigrants are astounded at this, that these strangers who they don't even know would do this. And you say that's because Americans help. What they do is help, is what Americans do. And they have a single word for this, which is service. And you say they pick up garbage on the beach, sell Girl Scout cookies, guide visitors through museums, collect books for libraries, volunteer in national parks and fire stations. Their teenagers travel to godforsaken villages on other continents to build homes or bring water to villages. I added that part. They do bake sales. They do GoFundMe campaigns, lemonade stands, raise money for kittens and animal shelters. This is, again, another thing on the American landscape that almost everyone natural-born American takes for granted. But it's eye-opening to you. And I have to get to this history while you talk about that.
Yeah, but this too doesn't happen anywhere else.
Right.
Other people in other countries are kind. They exercise acts of generosity and kindness. But this form of, taking matters into your own hands and, trying to remedy whatever ails your small community, if your library needs more books, that is just truly an American phenomenon. The way in which, citizens see themselves empowered enough to bring about the changes they want to see. And and this practice of service is very unprecedented and
you do see on the news probably every 4 weeks. If there's a flood in, Honduras, who knows, Honduras, you see some 8-year-old, who got her school to start, and before you know it, she's gone on Facebook and Instagram. She's raised, $3 million suddenly. Just one little girl who just had a good heart. You say, when Americans cannot raise money, they raise necessities. They have book drives, blood drives, food drives, turkey drives, even car drives. And if they can't, then I really like this part because I get a lot of this. If they cannot solicit you in person, they send letters. Heaps of envelopes arrive in America's mailboxes every day asking citizens to donate to one organization to another. I mean, every week I have the opportunity to adopt a child in an African country or save dogs from, terrible living conditions, all kinds of animals and so on. It is, again, what's so interesting to me about this book is that I'm looking it through your eyes. And these are eyes, to me, I get this literature all the time. And I go, oh gosh, don't, sometimes I contribute, most I don't. But your eyes bring so much to the table. It's why I recommend this book to, immigrants will find it useful, but regular old boring Americans, I think, will find it even more startling because it brings a pair of fresh eyes to this country that we think we know and we don't. Or we can't articulate it anyway.
Yeah, I mean,
you do so well.
This is what I thought. I said to someone that in 2016, I, for the first time, when I started hearing this anti-immigrant rhetoric, I heard a call to service, and it wasn't. I thought it was my moment to do something, to
Right.
contribute somehow, and I realized that my contribution was to show, among other things, to Americans the beauties of America that they couldn't see because they were born into it, and they had assumed that, it's part of the decor, that it exists.
Everybody does this, right?
And so I thought, if only I look at America with the eyes of someone who hasn't had these gifts in the past, then maybe I can show why we can still bet on America. We can still love this country while we try to correct the errors we find and address the shortcomings. So, people call it subversively patriotic. It's true. And someone described it as a love letter to America by an exacting lover. That's true too.
Oh, that's very good.
Yes, I mean, I'm not blind to what it is that we must improve, but I also think that we have a wonderful foundation upon which to continue to build.
Well, it's a beautiful thought. I was going to end our interview with something along those lines, but let me take the opportunity. We only have 9 minutes left anyway. You end your book by reminding immigrants that throughout American history, and I'm going to read now, I'm quoting now from Roy's book, the people who performed the hardest work in this nation most needed were the most detested. Native Americans, slaves from abroad, the Chinese built a good part of the Transcontinental Railroad, the Irish who built the Erie Canal, the Italians who built a subway system in New York, the Jews who cured polio and introduced bagels and other things to America, Japanese who pioneered farming and fishing, Mexicans and Central Americans who today harvest most of the bounty of food we find in our great big delicious grocery stores, or great big splendiferous grocery stores, I should say. And you say in your writing, you're a benefit to America. You've contributed billions more in government revenue than you've cost in the use of public services. Broadcast to everyone how much you and your fellow immigrants, documented or not, pay in taxes, and how much safer you make communities compared to those communities where most of the people are native born. A great deal of what you do in anonymity, which is why you can be readily painted as dispensable, you say. It's time to make yourself seen and heard. You have allies even if you don't know them. For all the bigots and eugenicists, there are all those who, however quirky and self-interested, will embrace and lift the immigrant. As I said, I meant to end with that, but because you brought it up, it is a plea not just to those of us who don't appreciate or notice to the full extent we should immigrants, but also to immigrants themselves. It's really great advice and empowering advice, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, in the neighborhood where we live, pretty much everybody uses several undocumented workers, and we all love them. And I happen to get close to one particular family whom I eventually was able to help sort out their visa situation. But they're here, and we all employ them, whether we are aware of it or not. And I think what should be concerning to us, as I try to explain in the book, is that we shouldn't want to be in a relationship with the undocumented, because once we do that, once we accept that they're lesser, then we begin to treat them as such, which means that we effectively begin to undermine our own democracy, because we're no longer a country of every man one vote or equal before the law. So I think we should, if we love this country, if we want our democracy to remain healthy and robust, then we should do everything possible in our power to make sure that everybody who's part of our community has the same rights as the rest of us.
Amen to that. I can't put it any better. Mm-hmm. You do spend the ending of your book on the plight of undocumented workers and how valuable they are to the country, but also how tenuous their lives are. Mm-hmm. Because their children never know if mom will come back from work or dad will come back from work the next day, or some ICE guy will scoop them up. Mm-hmm. They drive exactly at the speed limit as if there's a policeman sitting next to them. It's a fearsome way to live. If I can be political for a moment, I'm hoping the current administration changes that and makes it easier for a lot of undocumented people who really want to be in this country can have that opportunity. But I've got to thank you so much, Roya, for writing this book and for bringing it to our attention. I'll hold it up again. Let me expand the picture here so we can see it a little better. In fact, let me minimize you for a moment, Roya. If I can, minimize. Yeah. No. I don't know. Anyway, here's the book. You can see it right here. Beginner's Guide to America. This will be posted on YouTube, and I would hardly, more than I probably ever have with one of my webcasts for the last year, recommend you pass it along to friends who might be as fascinated with this as I am. I should also tell you, the beginning in 2 weeks, because we're doing this every 2 weeks now, we will be using a different platform than webinar than one we're using now, which will allow you to actually interact with the guests and talk to them if you'd like. Mm-hmm. As opposed to just asking questions. But when you receive your instructions for signing up, so you'll see new rules for signing up, but it'll be a much more facile system, and I hope much more attractive and easier to use, because I still fumble getting on here. And as you saw, Roya was a couple of minutes before he got her picture on. Roya Hakakian, a great honor to have you on. Have you been back to Iran since you came here at 19 years old?
No.
Are you desiring to do so?
I would love to go back. I am a persona non grata.
No, except for that part.
Yeah, primarily because of my writings. But I'd love to. It's one of my dreams.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, taking time out of your day today, and congratulations on a very affecting book. I've never had to reach for Kleenexes or tissues while interviewing an author, but reading the book I had to. I think this looks like a 4-tissue book today. So.
Thank you so much.
It's a testament to your writing and the power of your observations. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll see you all in 2 weeks. You'll get an email about our next guest, and I hope you enjoyed today. But again, it'll be on YouTube in about 24 hours. Please feel free to share it with friends. Thank you. Bye-bye.